The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. when Rowan Grace Ashford opened her eyes. She didn't move. Not yet. Movement meant sound, and sound meant death. Or worse. Something far worse than death. In the bed 3 feet away, Victor Elias Kane slept the heavy sleep of a man who'd consumed half a bottle of whiskey. His breathing rattled through the cheap motel room like a broken engine. Rowan had learned to read those sounds the way sailors read the sea. Tonight the rhythm was deep, steady, drunk enough to sleep through an earthquake. She'd been counting down to this moment for 3 days. 3 days ago, she'd been standing outside the bathroom door when Victor's phone rang. The walls in the Sunset Motel were thin as paper. She'd heard every word. California by Friday, Victor had said, his voice tight with the tension he only showed when talking to them. The people he worked for. The people who bought children like groceries. Yeah, this one's ready for transfer. Clean papers, fully trained, no trouble. Rowan was 7 years old. She knew what transfer meant. Now in the darkness, she counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. On the fourth exhale, she moved. Her bare feet touched the carpet without sound. 18 months of survival had taught her to move like smoke. She'd learned to become invisible in the spaces between Victor's attention, to disappear into wallpaper and silence. The worn teddy bear sat on the dresser where Victor made her keep it. She reached for it with hands that wanted to shake but couldn't afford to. The bear's brown fur was matted from years of desperate hugging. Its button eyes had been her only friends through 100 anonymous motel rooms. Her fingers found the small hair in the bear's back seam. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was everything that remained of her old life. A faded photograph, her mother's bracelet, and $6 in crumpled bills she'd collected over months, one drop quarter at a time. The money wouldn't get her far, but far enough. Rowan pulled on the jeans she'd hidden under her pillow. The pink t-shirt was 2 sizes too big, stolen from a Walmart 3 states ago, when Victor had left her in the car. She'd been preparing for this night 4 weeks, collecting pieces of an escape like a bird building a nest from stolen string. Victor's breathing hitched, stopped. Rowan froze, every muscle locked, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. 1 second. 2. 3. His breathing resumed. The whiskey had him deep. She moved toward the door, clutching the teddy bear against her chest. The doorknob was cold under her palm. It turned with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Victor didn't stir. The night air hit her face like a baptism. Cool, clean, free. Rowan ran. The Sunset Motel sat on the outskirts of Riverside, Oregon, a forgotten town that existed only to service the highway. At 3 in the morning, the parking lot was a graveyard of trucks and sedans. Security lights cast pools of sickly yellow across cracked asphalt. Rowan's feet slapped pavement as she sprinted toward the road. Behind her, the motel room door remained closed. No shouts, no footsteps. Not yet. But he would come. Victor always came. She'd run before. 4 times in 18 months she'd tried to escape. Once in Idaho, twice in Nevada, once in Colorado. Each time he'd found her within hours. Each time the punishment had been worse. The last time he'd locked her in a closet for 3 days with no food. Just water pushed through the gap under the door. Just darkness and the sound of her own breathing. This time had to be different. This time she had a plan. Rowan reached the highway and turned east, following the distant glow on the horizon. Music throbbed through the night air. Even from 2 miles away, she could hear it. The rumble of engines, the roar of a crowd, the Iron Thunder Rally. She'd seen the posters 3 days ago when Victor had stopped for gas. Hundreds of motorcycles. Thousands of people. Food vendors and live music and chaos that could swallow a small girl whole. But it wasn't the chaos she was running toward. It was the men on the motorcycles. Rowan's father had been dead for 18 months, but his voice lived in her memory with perfect clarity. "Bikers aren't what people think, baby girl," he'd told her once, watching a group of leather-clad riders pull into a rest stop. "Most of them are good men, protective, especially of kids. You ever need help, real help, you find yourself some bikers." At the time, she'd been 5 years old. The memory had seemed unimportant. Now it was everything. Rowan ran until her lungs burned. The teddy bear bounced against her chest. Her bare feet were bleeding, leaving small prints on the asphalt that would vanish with the morning dew. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, Victor Kane was sleeping. But morning would come, and when it did, he would wake to an empty room. He would rage. He would search. And because he was very good at what he did, he would eventually find her. Unless she found sanctuary first. The rally lights grew brighter. The music got louder. Rowan could smell food now. Grilled meat and fried dough and smoke from 100 campfires. Her stomach cramped with hunger. Victor didn't believe in regular meals. Food was a reward for good behavior, and Rowan's behavior had been carefully calculated to seem compliant while she planned her escape. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The entrance to the rally appeared like a gate to another world. Motorcycles lined both sides of the road, chrome gleaming under strings of lights. People clustered in groups laughing and drinking. Music pounded from speakers the size of refrigerators. Rowan slowed to a walk. Her legs were shaking. Blood from her feet left marks on the gravel. A man in a leather vest looked at her, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. Rowan ducked past him, pushing deeper into the crowd. She needed to find the right person. Someone with authority. Someone who would believe a 7-year-old girl with a wild story and terror in her eyes. Someone who would stand between her and the monster. The sea of leather and chrome was overwhelming. Rowan's vision blurred with exhaustion and fear. She stumbled, nearly falling, caught herself against a parked Harley. And then she saw him. The man stood near the main stage, surveying the crowd with the careful attention of someone used to watching for trouble. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and arms marked with faded tattoos. A scar ran down his left cheek, silvered with age. His leather vest bore patches Rowan didn't understand, but the one on his chest was clear. A screaming eagle with spread wings. And beneath it, words that made her heart leap with desperate hope. President, Riverside Chapter. This was the man she needed. Jackson Gallagher, though Rowan didn't know his name yet, had the instincts of a hunter. At 53, after 30 years in law enforcement and 5 years running the local Hells Angels chapter, he could spot trouble from 100 yards away. The small figure weaving through the crowd registered in his peripheral vision. Wrong gate, wrong faces, wrong everything. Ashid's lone at 3:30 in the morning. Hawk moved before conscious thought kicked in, crossing the distance in long strides. The girl was maybe 7, dark hair tangled and matted with sweat. Her pink t-shirt hung off one shoulder. Her jeans were dirty and torn at the knees. But it was her eyes that stopped Hawk cold. They held the 1,000-yard stare he'd seen in war veterans and abuse victims. The look of someone who'd witnessed horrors no child should ever know. She stumbled. Hawk caught her before she hit the ground. The girl's weight was nothing. She was all bones and terror, trembling like a wounded bird. Her bare feet were bleeding. Her arms were covered in fading bruises. "Hey there," Hawk said softly, crouching to put himself at her eye level alone. His voice carried the gentle authority of someone who'd talked down suicides and negotiated with hostage takers. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl stared at him with calculation beyond her years. She was trying to decide if he represented safety or another kind of danger. Hawk had seen that look before, on the faces of trafficking victims. His blood ran cold. "Rowan," she whispered finally. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming. Or crying, or both. "My name is Rowan Grace Ashford." "That's a beautiful name. I'm Hawk. Are you here with your family?" The question shattered something in her eyes. Tears spilled down dirt-streaked cheeks. "Please." Rowan gasped, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Please, you have to help me. He found me again. I thought I was safe here, but he always finds me. He always finds me, and I can't go back. Please don't let him take me back." Around them, other angels had noticed the interaction. Steele Williams, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, positioned himself with a clear view of the crowd. Wrench Patterson, the club's medic, knelt beside Hawk with the gentle demeanor that belied his 6'4" frame. "Rowan," Wrench said softly, "are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" She shook her head quickly. "I'm not hurt, not yet, but he's here, and when he finds me—" Her voice trailed into silence more terrifying than any scream. "Who's here, sweetheart?" Hawk asked, his detective instincts engaging with the familiar click of a weapon being loaded. "Victor." Rowan whispered the name like a curse. "He says he's my daddy, but he's not. He's not my daddy. My daddy is dead because of him." The words hit Hawk like a physical blow. Around the protective circle, his brothers' faces hardened with the cold rage reserved for those who preyed on children. Rowan Hawk said carefully, keeping his voice level, "Where is Victor now?" "At the motel. The sunset 2 miles back. But he'll wake up soon. He always wakes up. And he'll know I'm here because—" She clutched the teddy bear tighter. "Because he put something in buttons. A tracker. I found it 2 months ago, but I didn't take it out because I needed him to follow me here. To you." The admission hung in the air like smoke. This 7-year-old child had deliberately led her abductor to a motorcycle rally. She'd weaponized her captivity, turned the tool of her imprisonment into bait. Hawk had been a detective for 3 decades. He'd never met anyone, adult or child, with that kind of tactical thinking. "You brought him here on purpose?" Hawk asked quietly. Rowan nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "My daddy told me before he died. He said bikers protect kids. He said if I ever needed help, real help, I should find the angels." She swallowed hard. "I needed help, so I found you." The simplicity of her logic was devastating. Wrench was examining her with clinical efficiency, documenting injuries with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too much suffering. "Malnutrition," he reported quietly. "Old bruising, consistent with restraints. Needle marks on the inner arm." "When did you eat last, Rowan?" 2 days ago, at a gas station in Bend. Victor doesn't like to stop for food when we're traveling. He says it wastes time." The casual mention of deliberate starvation added another layer to their understanding of this child's suffering. Gunnar Martinez approached from the perimeter, his expression tight. "Boss, we got company. Black sedan organ plates circling the block. Drivers using binoculars." Hawk followed Gunnar's gaze to see a late-model sedan prowling the street like a shark. Through the passenger window, he glimpsed the driver. Expensive suit, silver hair, the artificial confidence of a predator who'd never been caught. The man's eyes swept the crowd until they found Rowan. His smile made Hawk's skin crawl. "That's him," Rowan whispered, terror flooding her voice as she spotted the car. "That's Victor's car." She pressed against Hawk's leg, her small body trembling with fear that was all too real. Despite her tactical planning, despite her brave escape, she was still a 7-year-old child facing her nightmare. "Please," she whispered again, "please don't let him take me." Hawk put one hand on her shoulder, a gesture of protection that would define the rest of his life. "Nobody's taking you anywhere," he said quietly. "Not while we're here." The sedan parked across the street. Victor Elias Kane emerged with the confident stride of a man who'd never been told no. He was older than Hawk expected, probably early 60s, but carried himself with predatory grace. The expensive suit and silver hair created an image of respectability, a successful businessman, a concerned parent. Only his eyes told the truth. They were the eyes of a hunter, cold, calculating, completely empty of human warmth. "Gentlemen," Victor called as he approached, his voice carrying false warmth that made Hawk's teeth ache. "I appreciate you keeping an eye on my daughter, but I'll take her off your hands now. Rowan has a tendency to wander when she's upset." Around Hawk, 15 angels had formed a protective wall. Their presence was intimidating without being aggressive, a living barrier between Victor and the child. "Funny thing," Hawk replied, rising while keeping one hand on Rowan's shoulder. "She doesn't seem upset about wandering. She seems upset about going back with you." Victor's facade cracked slightly. Professional concern gave way to something harder, more dangerous. "I'm afraid Rowan has behavioral issues that require specialized handling," he said with carefully modulated sympathy. "She's been through significant trauma that affects her judgment. The death of her parents was very difficult for her." "What kind of trauma?" Wrench asked with clinical precision. "Losing her real parents in a car accident 2 years ago," Victor replied smoothly. "I'm her legal guardian appointed by the court. She sometimes forgets that I'm here to help her, that I'm all she has left." The lie was masterful, delivered with perfect timing and just enough emotion to seem genuine. Hawk had interrogated enough liars to recognize the tells, the carefully rehearsed phrasing, the lack of genuine emotion, the eyes that never quite met theirs directly. "You have documentation?" Hawk asked. Victor produced a leather folder containing apparent custody papers, official seals, court stamps, a judge's signature. The documents looked legitimate at first glance, but something bothered Hawk. The date seemed inconsistent. The authorizing court was unfamiliar. "These papers are from Nevada," Steele observed, reading over Hawk's shoulder. "What's a Nevada guardian doing in Oregon?" "My work requires travel," Victor replied. "Rowan and I move around quite a bit. It's not ideal, but it's necessary." Behind them, more angels had gathered. Word was spreading through the rally. The protective circle around Rowan had grown to include 20 members, their presence creating an intimidating wall of leather and chrome, an absolute commitment. Hawk returned the documents to Victor, his expression neutral. "Here's the thing. The little girl doesn't want to go with you. Until we can verify these papers are legitimate, she stays here where she's safe." Victor's mask slipped completely. The concerned parent vanished. What remained was something far more dangerous. "I don't think you understand the legal implications of interfering with court-ordered custody," he said, his voice dropping 20 degrees. "I could have you all arrested for kidnapping. I have resources you can't imagine. Legal connections, friends in law enforcement across 3 states. I will get my daughter back." "You could try," Hawk replied with quiet confidence. "But first you'd have to explain why the 7-year-old is so terrified of her supposed guardian that she'd run to strangers for help. And why she hasn't eaten in 2 days." Wrench added, his medical authority giving weight to the accusation. "And why she has needle marks on her arm," Gunner said from the circle's edge. Victor realized he was facing more than motorcycle enthusiasts. These men had experience, training, and they had absolute commitment to protecting this child. His expression shifted through several emotions before settling on cold fury. "This isn't over," he said, dropping all pretense of warmth. "I have lawyers on retainer, judges who owe me favors. By tomorrow morning, I'll have legal authority to remove Rowan from your custody. And when I do, there will be consequences for everyone involved in this interference." He turned to leave, then paused, looking directly at Rowan with malevolence that made the air feel colder. "You can't hide forever, sweetheart," he said softly. "You know that? I always find you." Rowan's small hand slipped into Hawk's. Her voice when she spoke was barely audible. "Not this time," she whispered. "This time, I have real help." Victor's smile was a slash of cruelty. "We'll see about that." He returned to his sedan and drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure they all saw him leave, making sure they understood this was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. As the taillights disappeared, Rowan sagged against Hawk's leg. The adrenaline that had sustained her escape was draining away, leaving only exhaustion and fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nobody ever said no to him before. Nobody ever stood up to him." Hawk squeezed her hand gently. "Well, they just met the wrong group of people to mess with." Within the hour, the rally had transformed into a military operation. Hawk activated the club's emergency network, sending out a message that would reach Hell's Angels chapters across 3 states. The code was simple but understood by every member. "Child in danger. Need backup. Come prepared." Rowan sat in the clubhouse, a converted garage that served as the chapter's headquarters. The building was rough, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, but it was clean and secure. Most importantly, it had only 2 entrances, both now guarded by angels who looked ready to fight a small war. Wrench conducted a thorough medical examination while Steele's girlfriend, a nurse named Miranda, assisted. Rowan submitted to the inspection with the resigned patience of someone who'd learned not to fight the inevitable. The findings painted a horrifying picture. "Chronic malnutrition," Wrench reported, his voice tight with controlled fury. "She's probably 15 pounds underweight for her age and height. Old bruising on her wrists and ankles consistent with restraints. Scarring suggests they've been applied repeatedly over months, maybe years." He pointed to faint marks on Rowan's inner arm. "These are injection sites. Fresh enough to be recent, old enough to suggest this isn't the first time. My guess, sedatives. Probably to keep her compliant during transport." Steele looked up from his laptop where he'd been examining Victor's documentation. "The custody papers are forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries. The court seal is wrong. The judge's signature doesn't match archived samples from the Nevada court system, and the case number doesn't exist." "What about Victor himself?" Hawk asked. Steele's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Victor Elias Kane has lived at 12 different addresses in the past 3 years. Always cash leases, Always short-term, always moving before neighbors get too familiar. Before that, he was William Elias Strauss, wanted in Texas for trafficking offenses dating back 15 years. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Gunner returned from a perimeter check with information that made Hawk's blood freeze. Found where he's staying, Gunner reported. Sunset Motel Room 117. Manager says he checked in 3 days ago, paid cash for a week, said he was traveling with his sick daughter who needed rest and quiet. Any sign of the daughter before tonight? Hawk asked. None, manager never saw her. But here's the thing. Gunner pulled out his phone showing photos he'd taken through the motel window. He's got surveillance equipment in there, high-end tracking gear, laptop with what looks like monitoring software, and photos. He swiped to the next image. Hawk felt his stomach turn. The motel room wall was covered in photographs of Rowan, dozens of them, taken over months, maybe years. Rowan eating, Rowan sleeping, Rowan crying, each image carefully pinned to the wall like she was a target being studied, or a possession being cataloged. Rowan had been sitting quietly in the corner, crayoning on paper Miranda had given her. But now she looked up, her eyes holding a weariness that belonged to someone far older. He always finds me, she said matter-of-factly. I ran away 4 times before. Once in Idaho, twice in Nevada, once in Colorado. Every time he found me in less than a day. How long have you been with Victor, sweetheart? Hawk asked gently. Rowan considered the question seriously, her face scrunching with concentration. Since I was little, before my front teeth fell out. She pointed to the gap where adult teeth were growing in. I remember a different house. Different people who were nice to me and made me feel safe. But Victor says they didn't want me anymore. That I was bad and they sent me away. The timeline suggested at least 2 years of captivity. Possibly longer. Hawk felt the familiar rage building, the same fury that had made him an excellent cop and a dangerous enemy. The kind of anger that had to be controlled, channeled, or it would consume everything in its path. Rowan, he said carefully, do you remember your last name before Victor? Ashford, she said immediately. Rowan Grace Ashford. Mama called me her little rose because she said I smelled like flowers when she hugged me. And Daddy, her voice caught, Daddy called me Gracie Bird because I liked to sing. Steele's fingers were already moving across the keyboard, searching databases most people didn't know existed. What he found made the room fall absolutely silent. Jesus Christ, he breathed, his face going pale. Rowan Grace Ashford, age 7, reported missing from Spokane, Washington 18 months ago. He turned the laptop so that everyone could see the screen. The missing persons report showed a family photo. A man and woman with warm smiles holding a small girl with dark hair and bright eyes. The image radiated happiness, safety, love. Below the photo, the details told a darker story. Parents Michael and Rose Ashford both found shot to death in their home 3 days after Rowan disappeared. Steele continued, his voice hollow. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no leads. The case went cold after 6 months. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Victor hadn't simply abducted a child from the street. He'd murdered her parents and stolen her life. He'd killed the only people who could identify him, then vanished with Rowan into a network of fake identities and constant movement. There's more, Steele said quietly. 5 other children reported missing in similar circumstances over the past 4 years. Families' murdered children disappeared without a trace. Different states, different timelines, but the same pattern. No evidence, no suspects, no leads. Serial killer, Wrench said quietly. But instead of killing the children, he's keeping them, or selling them. Hawk looked at Rowan, who had gone very still. She was staring at the family photo on the laptop screen, her small face struggling to contain emotions too big for a 7-year-old body. That's them, she whispered. That's my real mama and daddy. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't sob, didn't wail, just cried with the quiet grief of someone who'd learned that loud emotions brought punishment. Hawk made a decision that would define the rest of his life. It doesn't matter what Victor's endgame is, he said quietly. What matters is it stops now, tonight, here. Steele nodded. What's the plan, boss? Plan is simple. We tell the truth, all of it. We contact The FBI, the Spokane PD, every law enforcement agency with jurisdiction. We document everything, and we don't let that monster take Rowan anywhere. Gunner pointed toward the entrance. We got problems. 3 police cruisers just pulled up, and that's Sheriff Bradford Hayes getting out. Victor must have convinced him we're holding his daughter illegally. Through the window, Hawk could see the sheriff approaching, flanked by 3 deputies. Behind them, Victor Kane stood next to his sedan, his expensive suit and silver hair, creating the perfect image of a concerned parent seeking help from the authorities. It was a masterful performance. What do we do? Miranda asked. Hawk looked at Rowan, who met his gaze with trust that terrified him. This child had placed her life in his hands, had believed against all evidence and experience that he would protect her. He couldn't let her down. We do what we always do, Hawk said quietly. We stand our ground, and we don't let them take her. Sheriff Bradford Hayes had been in law enforcement for 26 years. He'd seen domestic disputes, custody battles, and enough family drama to fill a library. But something about this situation felt different. The Hells Angels had a reputation in Riverside. Not a bad one, surprisingly. Hawk Gallagher ran a tight chapter, kept his guys in line, and actually contributed to the community in quiet ways most people never noticed. But a man in an expensive suit claiming they'd kidnapped his daughter, that required investigation. Hayes approached the clubhouse with careful authority, his deputies flanking him in a formation that suggested official business without outright aggression. Gentlemen, Hayes called out, I'm Sheriff Bradford Hayes. I've received a complaint that you're holding a child against her will. I need to speak with whoever's in charge. Hawk stepped forward, his law enforcement background evident in his posture. Sheriff, I'm Jackson Gallagher, former Portland PD. This is a complex situation that requires immediate investigation before any child changes custody. The situation is simple, Victor interjected, his voice modulated with perfect parental outrage. These men have kidnapped my daughter despite valid custody documentation. I demand you arrest them and return Rowan to me immediately. Hayes looked between Hawk and Victor, his instincts telling him this was more complicated than a simple custody dispute. Is that accurate? Hayes asked Hawk. Are you holding a child? We are protecting a child who came to us asking for help, Hawk replied carefully. A child who claims that man murdered her biological parents 18 months ago. A child who says those custody documents are forgeries. A child who is terrified of being returned to her abductor. Victor's facade of patience cracked. This is ridiculous. Sheriff, I have legal documentation. I have rights as her guardian. These men are interfering with a lawful custody arrangement based on the confused statements of a traumatized child. Traumatized by you, a small voice said. Everyone turned to see Rowan standing in the clubhouse doorway. She looked tiny, framed by the industrial entrance, her borrowed sweatshirt hanging past her knees. But her voice was steady. My name is Rowan Grace Ashford, she said clearly. I'm 7 years old. 18 months ago, that man broke into my house in Spokane, Washington. He shot my mama and daddy while I watched. Then he took me, and he's been moving me from place to place ever since. Those papers are fake. He's not my guardian. He's the man who killed my family. The silence that followed was absolute. Sheriff Hayes looked at the small girl with growing horror. At 7 years old, she spoke with the precision of someone giving sworn testimony. No hysteria, no embellishment. Just facts delivered with devastating clarity. That's a serious accusation, Hayes said carefully. It's the truth, Rowan replied. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. I wrote down the addresses. 12 motels in 18 months. Idaho, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Washington, California, and Oregon. I can tell you the dates, the names he used, everything. She held out the paper. Her handwriting was childish letters, wobbly and uneven, but the information was meticulously detailed. Hayes took the paper, scanning the contents with increasing concern. Victor stepped forward, his expression shifting to wounded frustration. Sheriff, surely you can see what's happening here. Rowan has been influenced by these men. They've filled her head with false accusations. This is parental alienation of the worst kind. Actually, a new voice interrupted, it's none of those things. Everyone turned to see a woman approaching from a dark SUV that had pulled up unnoticed. She was 40-something, wearing a practical suit and carrying credentials that glinted under the streetlights. Agent Catherine Sullivan, FBI, she announced, displaying her badge. Mr. Kane, or should I say William Strauss, you're under arrest for interstate kidnapping, murder, trafficking, and about 15 other federal charges. Victor's facade shattered completely. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed his face. Fear. This is a mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have documentation. I have rights. You have forgeries. Agent Sullivan cut him off. Rowan Grace Ashford was reported missing 18 months ago after her parents Michael and Rose Ashford were found murdered in their Spokane home. We've been tracking your movement patterns, your false identities, your systematic targeting of isolated families. 2 FBI agents moved forward with handcuffs. Victor twisted as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, staring at Rowan with pure malevolence. This isn't over, he called out, his voice dropping to a hiss. You'll never be free of me. I'll find a way. I always find a way. But Rowan, surrounded by 15 motorcycle club members who'd sworn to protect her, stood straight for the first time since they'd met her. No, she said clearly, you won't. Because now I have a real family again. People who actually protect me. People who believe me. You have no power anymore. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. As the agents led him toward their vehicle, he sagged between them, the predator finally caught by prey that had learned to fight back. Sheriff Hayes watched the arrest with the expression of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. Hell of a night, he said quietly to Hawk. Hell of a kid, Hawk replied, looking at Rowan with something that felt dangerously close to pride. Agent Sullivan approached them, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with genuine concern. We've been tracking Strauss for 6 months, she explained. Had reports of his pattern, but could never get close enough to confirm. When the Riverside PD ran those custody papers through their system earlier tonight, it triggered our alert. We've had a team en route for the past 2 hours. She knelt in front of Rowan, her voice gentle. You're safe now, Rowan. Victor can't hurt you anymore. But I need to ask you some questions. Can you tell me about the other children? Rowan nodded seriously. There are 5 of them. I saw them 2 months ago when Victor took me to a warehouse in Idaho to pick up supplies. I heard them crying, 3 girls and 2 boys, I think. Younger than me. They were in a blue building off Highway 84 past Boise. There was a Shell station, then a dirt road on the left. The warehouse had a faded picture of a grain silo on the side. The specificity of her description was staggering. Agent Sullivan was already on her phone relaying coordinates to another team. We're going to find them, Rowan, she promised. Because of you. Because you were brave enough to escape and smart enough to remember everything. Rowan's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her face as 18 months of terror survival and desperate hope finally found release. Hawk picked her up without thinking about it, held her while she cried into his shoulder. She weighed nothing. All bones and resilience in a spirit that refused to break. You're safe now, Gracie Bird, he whispered, using the nickname her father had given her. I promise. You're safe. And for the first time in 18 months, Rowan Grace Ashford believed it. The sun rose over Riverside like a judgment. Dawn light filtered through the clubhouse windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Rowan Grace Ashford had been awake for 36 hours, but sleep felt like a luxury from another life. A life where 7-year-old girls worried about homework and playgrounds instead of survival and escape. She sat at the long table in the club's main room, surrounded by angels who'd stayed through the night. Steele brought her pancakes from the diner down the street. Real pancakes, thick and fluffy, drowning in syrup. The smell alone made her stomach cramp with hunger so intense it felt like violence. Easy, Hawk said gently, watching her attack the food with desperate efficiency. You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast. Rowan forced herself to slow down. Forced her body to remember that food wasn't going to disappear if she didn't consume it immediately. That there would be more meals. That starvation was no longer her daily reality. But old habits died hard. Agent Sullivan had left at dawn with promises to return. The FBI was mobilizing teams across 3 states, coordinating with local law enforcement, building a case that would ensure Victor Kane never saw freedom again. But bureaucracy moved slowly, even with federal urgency behind it. Victor was in custody, but he wouldn't stay there without evidence. Evidence that only Rowan could provide. I need paper, she said suddenly, pushing away the half-finished pancakes. And colored pencils. Or crayons, whatever you have. Miranda appeared with a sketch pad and a box of markers. What are you thinking, honey? Rowan opened the pad to a fresh page, her small hands gripping a blue marker with the intensity of someone about to perform surgery. The warehouse, she said. The place where Victor took me 2 months ago. The place where the other kids are. I can draw it from memory. The room fell silent. Hawk moved to stand behind her, watching as she began to sketch. Rowan, the FBI is already looking for that location based on what you told them last night. They won't find it just from past Boise, Rowan replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived by paying attention to details adults missed. There are 100 dirt roads off Highway 84, but I remember exactly which one. Her marker moved across the paper with surprising precision. She drew the highway, first a thick line running left to right across the page. Then landmarks began to appear. There was a billboard, she said, adding a rectangle to the sketch. An advertisement for a casino, Native American casino called Rising Sun, I think. The paint was faded and peeling. It was on the right side of the highway, maybe 10 miles past the Boise city limits sign. She drew more details. A gas station with green and yellow signs, a rest stop with 3 picnic tables, a bridge over a dried riverbed. The dirt road was 2 miles past the bridge on the left. There was no street sign, but there was a fence post with barbed wire. The post was broken at the top, leaning toward the road like it was pointing the way. Her drawing grew more detailed. The warehouse took shape, a long, rectangular building with small windows near the roofline. She added the faded grain silo image on the sidewall, sketching in details that suggested she'd studied the building carefully during her brief time there. How long were you at this warehouse? Steele asked quietly. Maybe 20 minutes. Victor went inside to talk to someone. He made me wait in the car, but I could see the building from where he parked. Her marker paused. That's when I heard them. The other kids. They were crying, but it wasn't loud crying, it was quiet. Like they'd learned that being loud made things worse. The statement hung in the air like smoke. Rowan added more details to the sketch. A second building behind the warehouse, smaller, maybe a shed or office. A chain-link fence surrounding the property. Even the approximate number of windows in the position of the main door. There were 2 cars parked outside when we were there. She continued drawing simple rectangles to represent vehicles. One was a white van with no windows in the back. The other was a red truck, older, with rust on the doors. And there was a man, maybe 6 feet, with a shaved head. He wore a green army jacket even though it was summer. Steele was typing rapidly on his laptop, cross-referencing satellite imagery with Rowan's description. Kid, this is incredible. You remember all this from one 20-minute visit? Rowan looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. When you're in danger all the time, you learn to remember everything, because any detail might be the one that saves your life. She was 7 years old. She shouldn't understand survival tactics with this level of sophistication. But 18 months with a predator had taught her lessons no child should ever learn. Hawk studied the drawing, his detective instincts recognizing the value of what Rowan had created. This wasn't a child's vague sketch. This was a tactical map detailed enough to plan a raid. Steele, can you overlay this with satellite imagery of Highway 84 east of Boise? Steele's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within minutes, he had multiple screens open, comparing Rowan's drawing to actual geography. Holy hell, he breathed. This matches. Billboard for Rising Sun Casino at mile marker 47. Shell Station at mile marker 49. Bridge over Crane Creek at a mile marker 51. There's only one dirt road in the right position, and he zoomed in on the satellite image. There's a structure matching this description. Isolated property, no recent activity on record, owned by a shell corporation registered in Delaware. He turned the laptop so everyone could see. The satellite image showed exactly what Rowan had drawn. The warehouse, the smaller building, even the fence. She's right, Steele said, his voice mixing awe with horror. The kid mapped it perfectly from memory. Agent Sullivan needed to see this immediately. Hawk pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, Rowan spoke again. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I didn't tell Agent Sullivan last night because I wasn't sure if I remembered it right. But I do. She flipped to a new page and began drawing again. This time she sketched faces. Victor wasn't alone, Rowan said, her marker creating rough portraits with surprising accuracy. He worked with at least two other people, maybe more. The first face emerged on the paper, a woman 40-ish with short red hair and hard eyes. She was at the warehouse. I only saw her for a minute, but she was the one who came out to give Victor something. A folder, I think, or maybe an envelope. She had a tattoo on her neck, a spiderweb design. The second face appeared below the first. A man younger than Victor, maybe late 30s, with a shaved head and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. This man was at a motel in Colorado 3 months ago. He came to our room at night. Victor called him Garrett. They talked about inventory and delivery schedules. They didn't know I was awake. I pretended to sleep, but I listened to everything. She added more details to the portraits, the woman's angular features, the man's distinctive scar, small details that could make the difference between identification and anonymity. There was a third person. I only heard his voice on the phone. Victor called him Judge. They talked about papers and court orders. Victor said, "The judge always comes through when we need clean documentation." Hawk felt ice form in his stomach. A judge. Victor had a judge on his payroll, someone who could create legal cover for kidnapping and trafficking. "Rowan," he said carefully, "did Victor ever mention which court this judge worked in?" She shook her head. "No, but I heard him say something once. He told the judge, 'Next time I'm in Riverside, we'll settle accounts properly.' That was 3 weeks ago, before we came here." The implications crashed down like an avalanche. Victor hadn't come to Riverside by accident. He'd been heading here deliberately. He had resources in this town, connections, a corrupt judge who could make custody papers look legitimate. Steele was already running searches cross-referencing judges in the county against financial records and known associates. "We need to get this information to Sullivan," Hawk said. "Now." But before he could make the call, Gunner burst through the door, his expression tight with alarm. "Boss, we got a situation. Sheriff Hayes just called. There's a court order. Official signed by Judge Carlisle Miller this morning. It mandates immediate return of Rowan Ashford to the custody of Victor Kane pending a full investigation." The words hit like a sledgehammer. "That's impossible," Wrench said. "Kane's in FBI custody." "He was released 2 hours ago," Gunner replied. "His lawyers got an emergency hearing, argued that the FBI arrest was based on unsubstantiated claims from a minor child. Judge Miller ruled that until formal charges are filed, Kane had to be released, and he issued this custody order at the same time." Hawk looked at the paper Gunner handed him. Official court seal, judge's signature, legal language demanding immediate compliance. "Judge Miller," Rowan said quietly from her seat. Victor said the judge worked in Riverside. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Judge Carlisle Miller was the corrupt official in Victor's pocket, the man who created legal cover for trafficking, who turned kidnapping into custody disputes and murder into unfortunate accidents. And he'd just given Victor legal authority to reclaim Rowan. "This is bad," Steele said, reading the order over Hawk's shoulder. "If we don't comply, we're in contempt. Sheriff Hayes will have to enforce it." "Then we fight it," Hawk replied. "We get Sullivan back here. We challenge the order. There's no time," Gunner interrupted. "Hayes is on his way with the court order. He'll be here in 20 minutes. If we don't hand Rowan over, he'll arrest all of us." Rowan had gone very still at the table, her markers forgotten. She understood what was happening. Understood that the legal system she'd hoped would protect her was being used as a weapon against her. "I won't go back," she said quietly. "I can't. If I go back, I'm dead. Or worse." Hawk knelt beside her chair, putting himself at eye level. "You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out." "How about," Rowan asked, and the hopelessness in her voice was devastating. "He has a judge. He has lawyers. He has the law on his side. You said we'd use the truth, but the truth doesn't matter when he can make the law say whatever he wants." Before Hawk could answer, his phone rang. Agent Sullivan's number flashed on the screen. "Sullivan," Hawk answered. "We've got a problem." "I know," the agent replied, her voice tight with frustration. "Judge Miller's order just hit my desk. We're filing emergency motions to stay the order, but that takes time. Legal channels move slowly, even with a child's life at stake." "How much time do we have?" "Maybe 6 hours, maybe less. Miller's order is technically valid until we can prove it's fraudulent. And proving a sitting judge is corrupt requires evidence we don't have yet." Hawk looked at Rowan, who was watching him with the desperate calculation of someone trying to find an angle, any angle to survive. What if we had evidence, Hawk asked slowly. What if we could prove Miller is part of Victor's network? Then we could move immediately. Arrest Miller, void the order, and build a racketeering case that would bury them both. But Hawk, that kind of evidence doesn't just appear. We'd need documented communication, financial transfers, testimony from witnesses. It could take weeks. Rowan tugged on Hawk's sleeve. When he looked down, she was holding up her sketch pad. She'd drawn a new image, a phone, and beside it a series of numbers. Victor's phone, she whispered. He kept it in his jacket pocket. The password was 4773. He thought I didn't see him enter it, but I watched every time. His phone has everything. All his calls, all his messages, all his contacts. She looked up at Hawk with eyes that held a gambler's desperate certainty. If you can get his phone, you can prove everything. The plan was insane, reckless, probably illegal, but it was also their only chance. Hawk explained Rowan's idea to Sullivan, who went silent for a long moment. I can't officially sanction breaking into an evidence locker, she finally said. But if someone were to accidentally discover that phone and its contents became public through unofficial channels, well, sometimes evidence finds its way into investigations through unexpected routes. It was as close to permission as they were going to get. Steele volunteered immediately. I can be in and out of the county evidence room in 10 minutes. They upgraded their security last year, but the system has a back door I helped them install. They never changed the admin password. Do it, Hawk said, but be careful. If you get caught, I won't get caught, Steele replied. He was already moving toward the door. The next 3 hours were the longest of Rowan's life. She sat in the clubhouse surrounded by angels, who'd positioned themselves like a military unit preparing for siege. Gunner coordinated perimeter security. Wrench inventoried medical supplies in case things went violent. Miranda stayed with Rowan, keeping her calm and distracted. But Rowan couldn't be distracted. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to Sheriff Hayes arriving with that court order, another minute closer to being handed back to Victor. She thought about running again. She'd survived 18 months by running. But where would she go? How far could a 7-year-old get without help? The answer was nowhere. She'd been lucky once finding Hawk and the Angels. Lightning didn't strike twice. He's going to kill me, you know, Rowan said quietly to Miranda. If he gets me back, not right away, but eventually, I've become too much trouble, too much risk. Miranda took her hand. That's not going to happen, sweetie. We won't let it. You can't stop a court order. Maybe not, but we can make damn sure that order gets challenged and overturned before anyone takes you anywhere. Rowan wanted to believe her, but 18 months had taught her that hope was a luxury and trust was how you got hurt. Steele returned 90 minutes after he left, breathing hard and carrying a small evidence bag. Victor's phone. Gunner, who had IT skills that went beyond what was strictly legal, went to work immediately. The password Rowan provided worked on the first try. What they found on that phone was worse than anyone had imagined. Thousands of messages, dozens of contacts, financial transactions tracked through encrypted apps, photos that made Hawk physically sick, and communications with Judge Carlisle Miller going back 3 years. This is everything, Gunner breathed, scrolling through the data. Every transaction, every deal, every child Victor trafficked through this network. And Miller's right in the middle of it. He created legal cover for at least 15 kidnappings, signed fake custody orders, dismissed police reports. He's been running interference for this trafficking ring for years. He transferred the data to a secure drive and sent it directly to Agent Sullivan's encrypted email. 20 minutes later, Sullivan called back. We have enough, she said, and Hawk could hear the fierce satisfaction in her voice. Arrest warrants are being issued for Judge Miller right now. Federal warrants, not local. He can't wiggle out of this, and his custody order void as of 10 minutes ago. Fruit of a corrupt tree. Hawk felt something in his chest unclench. So Rowan is safe, legally protected under federal custody while we build the full case. Victor can't touch her. Miller can't help him. It's over. But it wasn't over. Not quite. Because at that moment, Gunner's perimeter alarm went off. Motion sensors detecting vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Hawk moved to the window and felt his blood run cold. 3 cars, black sedans with tinted windows, moving slowly down the street toward the clubhouse with the deliberate pace of predators closing in on wounded prey. In the lead vehicle visible through the windshield was Victor Kane. He'd come for Rowan himself. Everyone inside. Hawk ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded tactical situations before. Lock down. Nobody leaves, nobody enters. The Angels moved with practiced efficiency. Steele and Gunner took positions by the windows. Wrench grabbed the medical kit. Miranda got Rowan behind the bar, the most protected position in the room. The sedans parked outside, forming a loose semicircle that blocked the clubhouse entrance. Victor emerged from the lead car, no longer bothering with the facade of respectability. His expensive suit was rumpled. His silver hair was disheveled. His eyes held the cold fury of a predator who'd been denied his prey. 3 men emerged from the other vehicles, large professional carrying themselves with the relaxed confidence of people who hurt others for money. Gallagher, Victor shouted, his voice echoing down the street. Send out my daughter, now! I have a legal court order, and I'm not leaving without her. Hawk stepped to the door but didn't open it. Your court order was voided 20 minutes ago. Judge Miller's been arrested on federal charges. It's over, Kane. The FBI has everything, every message, every transaction, every child you trafficked. You're done. The words hit Victor like physical blows. His face went through several expressions before settling on something dangerous. That phone was in police evidence, he said slowly. Locked and secured. How did you understanding dawned? You stole evidence. That's illegal search and seizure. Nothing on that phone is admissible. Maybe, Hawk replied. Or maybe an anonymous tip led investigators to check their evidence more carefully, and they discovered the phone had been improperly logged. Details get fuzzy in investigations this big. Victor's mask cracked completely. What emerged was pure rage. You think you've won, he snarled. You think I'll just walk away? I've invested 18 months in that girl. 18 months of training and preparation. She's mine. She belongs to Mike. I don't belong to you, a small voice said. Everyone turned to see Rowan standing in the doorway, having slipped past Miranda. She looked tiny in her oversized sweatshirt, but her voice was steady. I never belonged to you, she continued, walking forward, despite Hawk's gesture to stop. You stole me. You killed my parents. You tried to break me, but you failed. She stepped fully outside, standing on the clubhouse steps with 15 angels forming a protective wall behind her. I'm not scared of you anymore, Rowan said clearly. You taught me to survive, to pay attention, to remember everything. And I used all those lessons against you. I drew the map that will help the FBI find those other kids. I remembered your phone password. I can identify every person you worked with. She took another step forward, her small frame somehow commanding all the space between the clubhouse and Victor's cars. You made me strong when you meant to break me, and now that strength is going to destroy you. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor stared at the 7-year-old girl who had just declared war on him with the calm precision of a seasoned general. Something shifted in his expression. The predator, realizing perhaps for the first time that he'd underestimated his prey. You can't hide behind these bikers forever, Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have resources, connections, money. I'll find a way. No, you won't, a new voice interrupted. A dark SUV pulled up behind Victor's sedans, and Agent Sullivan emerged with 4 FBI agents. William Elias Strauss, she announced, displaying federal arrest warrant. You're under arrest for interstate kidnapping, murder, child trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. Your network is dismantled. Your associates are being arrested as we speak. Judge Miller is already in custody. It's over. The FBI agents moved forward with weapons drawn but not aimed. Professional, controlled, inevitable. Victor's bodyguard stepped back, hands visible, smart enough to recognize when a fight was unwinnable. But Victor himself seemed unable to process defeat. He took a step toward Rowan, and 20 angels tensed simultaneously. You'll regret this, he hissed at the small girl standing on the clubhouse steps. Every day for the rest of your miserable life, you'll remember that you belong to me, that I own you, that... You own nothing, Rowan interrupted, her voice cutting through his rant like a blade. You're just a sick, evil man who hurts children because real people terrify you. You're weak. You're pathetic. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monster you are." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. FBI agents grabbed Victor, pulling his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound like a coffin closing. As they led him toward the SUV, Victor twisted back for one last look at Rowan. "This isn't over," he said, but the words were hollow. Empty threats from a defeated predator. "Yes," Rowan replied quietly. "It is." The SUV doors slammed. The convoy of federal vehicles pulled away, taking Victor Kane into custody. And for the first time in 18 months, Rowan Grace Ashford was truly, completely, finally free. She stood on the clubhouse steps, watching the vehicles disappear down the street. The morning sun was bright overhead. The air smelled like coffee and freedom. Behind her, Hawk's hand settled gently on her shoulder. "You did it, Gracie Bird," he said softly. "You survived. You fought. You won." Rowan leaned against his legs, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation drained away, leaving only the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd carried too much weight for too long. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "It's really over." The clubhouse had returned to a cautious celebration when Agent Sullivan approached Hawk an hour later. Rowan sat at the table, finally eating the lunch Miranda had prepared, surrounded by angels, who treated her like a conquering hero. "We need to talk about next step," Sullivan said quietly. "Victor's in federal custody, but there are procedures. Rowan needs to be placed with family while we build the case." "She doesn't have family," Hawk replied. "Parents are dead, no siblings. She told me her grandparents passed away years ago." "Actually," Sullivan said, pulling out a file, "she does. We located an aunt and uncle, Rose Ashford's younger sister, Evelyn, and her husband, Thomas. They live in Sacramento. They've been looking for Rowan since the day she disappeared." Hawk felt something twist in his chest. Relief that Rowan had family. And something else. Something selfish that he didn't want to examine too closely. "Have they been contacted?" "They're on their way here now, driving up from Sacramento. Should arrive in about 3 hours. Sullivan paused. "They've been working with us for the past 6 months, providing information about Rose and Michael, funding private investigators, never giving up hope." Before Hawk could respond, Miranda called out from the table, "Hawk, I think Rowan should hear this." Rowan looked up from her sandwich as Hawk and Sullivan approached. "Sweetheart," Sullivan said gently, kneeling beside Rowan's chair. "We found your family, your Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Thomas, your mother's sister. They're coming to see you." Rowan's face went through several expressions. Hope, fear, confusion. "I don't remember them," she said finally. "I was only 5 when it happened. I don't know if I'll recognize them." "They'll recognize you," Sullivan assured her. "And they have photos, stories about your mother, things that will help you remember." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, processing. "Will they want to take me away from here?" she asked, looking at Hawk. "Away from you?" The question hit Hawk harder than he expected. "That's something you'll need to talk about together," he said carefully. "But Rowan, they're your real family, your blood. They can give you things I can't. A real home, stability, a normal life." "I don't want normal," Rowan replied. "I want safe, and I feel safe here." Before the conversation could continue, Gunnar appeared in the doorway. "Boss, there's a car pulling up. California plates. Man and woman, 40-ish. They're asking for Agent Sullivan." Sullivan checked her watch. "They made good time. That must be the Ashfords." Rowan's hand found Hawk's automatically, her small fingers gripping tight. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "You can, Hawk replied. "You've done harder things, and I'll be right here." The couple that entered the clubhouse looked like they'd been through their own kind of hell. Evelyn Ashford was 40-something with dark hair shot through with premature gray. She had Rose Ashford's eyes and bone structure, but grief had carved lines around her mouth that suggested years of sleepless nights. Thomas Ashford was tall and lean with kind eyes and the careful movements of someone who'd learned to be gentle in a world that often wasn't. They stopped in the doorway, scanning the room, and their eyes found Rowan with laser precision. Evelyn made a sound that was half sob, half prayer. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Rowan, baby, it's really you." She moved forward slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Tears streamed down her face unchecked. "I'm your Aunt Evelyn," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm your mama's little sister. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I remember everything about you." Rowan studied the woman with intense focus, trying to find familiar features in a face that was mostly strange. But there was something in Evelyn's eyes, something in the shape of her smile. "You look like Mama," Rowan said quietly. Evelyn laughed and cried simultaneously. "Everyone always said that. Rose was the pretty one, but we had the same smile, the same stubborn chin." She touched her own face. "You have it too, the Ashford chin. Your grandma used to say we could crack walnuts with our stubbornness." On this specific detail, so ordinary and real, broke through some of Rowan's defenses. "I don't remember much," Rowan admitted. "Victor said my old family didn't want me, that they were glad when I was gone." The words hit Evelyn like a physical assault. She knelt in front of Rowan, taking her small hands carefully. "That is a lie," Evelyn said fiercely. "The worst, cruelest lie that monster ever told you. We never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never stopped loving you. You are wanted. You are loved. You have always, always been our family." Thomas stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "We have pictures. Would you like to see?" Rowan nodded hesitantly. The photos that appeared on the screen showed a life Rowan had almost forgotten. Her mother and Evelyn as young women, arms around each other, laughing at some shared joke. Family barbecues with a younger Rowan running through a sprinkler. Christmases and birthdays and ordinary moments that had been extraordinary simply because they were filled with love. "This was your 5th birthday," Thomas said, showing a photo of Rowan in a princess dress blowing out candles while her parents watched with pride. "Your mom made that cake from scratch. Chocolate with raspberry filling. Your favorite." Rowan stared at the photo, and something shifted in her memory. A taste, a smell, the sensation of her mother's hand smoothing her hair. "She sang to me," Rowan whispered, "when she tucked me in, a song about mockingbirds and diamond rings." Evelyn's face crumpled. "Hush, little baby. It was Rose's favorite. Our mother sang it to us when we were little. Rose sang it to you every night." The memory unlocked others. Small details, the sound of her father's laugh, the way the kitchen smelled when her mother cooked, the feeling of being safe and loved and cherished. 18 months of captivity had tried to bury those memories, but they were still there waiting. Rowan looked at Evelyn and Thomas with new eyes. These weren't strangers. They were the connection to a life she'd thought was gone forever. "You really looked for me?" she asked. "Every single day," Thomas replied. "We hired private investigators. We worked with the FBI. We posted flyers in 40 states. We never gave up, not even when the police said the trail was cold, not even when people told us to accept that you were gone." Evelyn pulled out her phone, showing a different kind of photo. Missing person posters, reward notices, social media campaigns with thousands of shares, news articles documenting their search. "We spent everything we had," Evelyn said. "Sold our house, maxed out credit cards. It didn't matter. Finding you was all that mattered." She paused, glancing at Agent Sullivan. "There's something else you should know, Rowan. Something we probably should have told you first, but—" Evelyn took a deep breath. "We've been working with the FBI for 6 months. We had a tip from a private investigator that Victor might be heading to Oregon. We've been tracking his movements, trying to get close enough for federal agents to make an arrest." The revelation hung in the air. "You knew he was coming here?" Rowan asked slowly. "We suspected," Evelyn admitted. "We didn't know exactly when or where, but we'd been coordinating with Agent Sullivan, providing everything we learned. When you escaped and ended up at the rally," she smiled through tears, "I think maybe your dad was watching over you, guiding you to safety, and to people who would protect you." Rowan processed this information with the calculating mind that had kept her alive. "So you were helping even before I ran away." "We never stopped trying to bring you home, baby." The word home resonated in a way Rowan hadn't expected. She looked around the clubhouse, at Hawk, who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, at the angels who'd mobilized to protect a stranger's child, at Miranda, who'd held her through nightmares. This place felt like home. But looking at Evelyn and Thomas, seeing her mother's features in her aunt's face, hearing stories about a family she'd almost forgotten, maybe home was bigger than one place. Maybe it could include both the family you were born into and the family you found. I want to know you, Rowan said carefully. I want to remember Mama and Daddy. I want to hear stories and see pictures and learn about who they were, but she looked at Hawk. I also want to stay connected to the people who saved me. Is that okay? Evelyn smiled, genuine and warm. Of course it's okay. Family isn't either or, sweetheart. It's both and. We would never ask you to choose between people who love you. Thomas nodded agreement. Mr. Gallagher, he said, extending his hand to Hawk, we can't thank you enough for what you've done for our niece. You saved her life. You protected her when she had no one else. That makes you family in our eyes. Hawk shook his hand, feeling some of the tension in his chest ease. She's an extraordinary kid, Hawk said quietly. Brave, smart, stronger than most adults I know. She gets that from her mother, Evelyn said. Rose was the toughest person I ever knew. She'd be so proud of how Rowan survived, how she fought back. Agent Sullivan cleared her throat gently. We need to discuss next steps. Legally, Rowan needs to be placed with family while the case proceeds. That means going with Evelyn and Thomas. But, she added, seeing Rowan's face, that doesn't mean cutting ties with everyone here. Visits can be arranged. Video calls, whatever helps make the transition easier. Rowan looked between her aunt and Hawk, torn between two different kinds of safety. Can I think about it? She asked. Can I have time to figure out what I want? Of course, Evelyn said immediately. We're not going to rush you. We're staying in Riverside for a few days, getting to know each other, letting you adjust. And then when you're ready, you can come visit us in Sacramento, see your new room, meet the therapist we've been working with. Take everything as slowly as you need. The gentleness in her voice reminded Rowan of her mother. The patience reminded her that not all adults demanded immediate compliance. Okay, Rowan said finally. I can do that. Evening fell over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Evelyn and Thomas had checked into a hotel downtown, close enough to visit but far enough to give Rowan space. She sat on the clubhouse porch with Hawk, watching the sun set over the rally grounds. Most of the bikers had left, returning to normal lives. But the Riverside chapter remained a protective presence that showed no signs of dispersing. Are you scared? Hawk asked quietly. Rowan considered the question seriously. A little. Not of Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Thomas. They seem nice, really nice, but she struggled to find words for complicated feelings. What if I'm different now? What if 18 months with Victor changed me so much that I can't be the Rowan they remember? You're not supposed to be the Rowan they remember, Hawk said. You're supposed to be the Rowan you are now. Stronger, wiser, survive things no kid should survive. That's not worse, it's just different. Will you still be here if I go to Sacramento? I'm not going anywhere, Gracie Bird. You want to call me every day, I'll answer every time. You want to visit, my door is always open. You need help, I'm on the next plane. He squeezed her shoulder gently. You're not losing me. You're just gaining more family. Rowan leaned against his side, feeling safe in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for believing me, for protecting me, for not giving up. Thank you for being brave enough to run toward help instead of just away from danger. That took guts. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a Harley's engine rumbled to life. The sound that had once meant escape now meant home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers and therapists, and the long process of healing from trauma. But tonight, Rowan Grace Ashford was safe, surrounded by people who loved her, free from the monster who had stolen 18 months of her life. And for a 7-year-old girl who'd learned to survive by never hoping for too much, that was more than enough. The morning of the 4th day dawned cold and clear over Riverside. Rowan Grace Ashford stood in the clubhouse watching FBI agents coordinate with Hell's Angels members in a way that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Federal law enforcement and outlaw bikers working together with a single purpose: saving children. Agent Sullivan spread satellite images across the table, pointing to the warehouse Rowan had mapped with such devastating accuracy. 2 teams, Sullivan explained, her voice carrying military precision. Team Alpha hits the Idaho warehouse at 0600. That's Steel Gunner and 4 of my agents. Your objective is simple: secure the children, apprehend anyone on site, and gather evidence. She turned to a second map, this one showing Riverside and the surrounding area. Team Bravo stays here. That's me, Hawk, and the rest of the chapter. We maintain the stronghold and prepare for Victor's inevitable move. He'll come, Hawk said quietly. He's too invested to walk away. 18 months of his life went into Rowan. He'll try to reclaim what he thinks he owns. Rowan sat at the table dressed in clothes Miranda had bought her. Real clothes that fit properly, not the oversized hand-me-downs Victor had given her. She looked like a regular 7-year-old girl, except for her eyes. Those still held the weight of someone who'd seen too much. I want to help, Rowan said, her voice cutting through the tactical discussion. I can be useful. I know how Victor thinks, how he moves, what he'll try. Sullivan knelt beside her chair. Rowan, you have already helped more than you know. The map you drew, the information you provided, the phone password. You've done enough. But I can do more. Rowan's jaw set with stubborn determination. You said you needed bait, something to draw Victor out into the open where you can arrest him without complications. I can be that bait. Absolutely not, Hawk said immediately. We're not putting you in danger. I'm already in danger, Rowan replied with 7-year-old logic that was hard to argue against. Victor won't stop until he gets me back, or until you stop him permanently. If using me as bait ends this faster, then that's what we should do. Evelyn Ashford, who had been standing quietly in the corner with Thomas, stepped forward. She's right, Evelyn said softly. I hate it, but she's right. Victor is fixated on Rowan. He'll take risks to get to her that he wouldn't take otherwise. Risks that expose him. You can't seriously be suggesting we endanger your niece, Sullivan said, surprise evident in her tone. I'm suggesting we trust her, Evelyn replied. Rowan survived 18 months with a monster by being smart and observant and strategic. She's proven she can handle pressure, and she deserves to be part of ending this nightmare on her terms. Thomas nodded agreement, though his face showed the strain of a man advocating for something he desperately didn't want. If Rowan is willing and if proper safeguards are in place, then maybe we should listen to her. All eyes turned to Rowan, who sat straighter in her chair. I'm not scared anymore, she said clearly. I was scared for 18 months, every day, every minute. But now I have people who protect me, people who believe me, and I want to use that to save the other kids. The 5 in Idaho, and whoever else Victor was planning to hurt. The room fell silent. Finally, Sullivan spoke. If we do this, and that's a big if, you follow every instruction exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. You stay where we put you, you do what we say, and at the first sign of danger, you retreat to safety. Understood? Rowan nodded solemnly. Understood. Hawk looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rowan's expression stopped him. This child had been stripped of agency for 18 months, had been told where to go, what to do, how to exist. Giving her back some control, even in a dangerous situation, was important. Maybe necessary. All right, Hawk said finally. But we do this smart. Multiple layers of protection, exit strategies, and if anything goes wrong, we abort immediately. The plan came together with careful precision. Team Alpha would leave for Idaho at dawn, giving them 6 hours to reach the warehouse and conduct the raid. Their success would be the first domino, disrupting Victor's network and eliminating his resources. Team Bravo would position Rowan at a controlled location, a place Victor would expect her to be, but where FBI and Angels could maintain complete tactical superiority. The old grain mill on the edge of town, abandoned for a decade but with clear sight lines and only 2 entrances. They would let word slip through carefully managed channels that Rowan was there alone with minimal protection. An irresistible target. And when Victor came, they would be waiting. Steele left before dawn with 3 other Angels and 4 FBI agents. Wrench went with them, his medical skills necessary if they found children in need of immediate care. The convoy of vehicles disappeared into the early morning darkness, heading east toward Idaho and a warehouse full of nightmares. Rowan watched them leave from the clubhouse window. They'll be okay, Hawk said quietly beside her. Steele's good at what he does, and those FBI agents are trained for exactly this kind of operation. I know, Rowan replied. I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the kids they're going to find, about what those kids have been through. If it's anything like what I experienced. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Hawk put a hand on her shoulder. Whatever they've been through, it's ending today. Because of you. because you were brave enough to remember, to draw that map, to fight back. I just hope it's enough. It's more than enough, Gracie Bird. It's everything. By mid-morning, they'd moved Rowan to the grain mill. The building was exactly as Hawk remembered it from his days as a Portland detective. 3 stories of industrial decay surrounded by overgrown fields and accessed by a single dirt road. Perfect for an ambush. FBI agents positioned themselves in concealed locations around the perimeter. Snipers on the rooftops of adjacent buildings. Tactical teams in unmarked vehicles positioned along the access road. The entire operation was invisible to anyone approaching, but provided overlapping fields of fire and multiple response options. Inside the mill, Hawk and Gunner stayed with Rowan, 2 angels against whatever Victor might bring. It wasn't enough firepower to win a fight, but it was enough to keep Rowan alive until the cavalry arrived. Rowan sat on an old wooden crate in the center of the mill's main floor, surrounded by rusted equipment and broken windows that let in shafts of dusty sunlight. She'd insisted on being visible from the road, in making herself an obvious target. "How long do we wait?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "As long as it takes," Hawk replied. "Victor will come. His ego won't let him walk away." "What if he doesn't? What if he's smarter than we think and sees the trap?" Gunner checked his phone, monitoring communications from the perimeter teams. "Then we adjust." But Sullivan's people leaked information through 3 different channels. "Victor knows you're here. He knows you're vulnerable. He'll come." They waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun climbed higher, painting the mill's interior in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Rowan sat motionless on her crate, looking for all the world like a small girl playing in an abandoned building. Perfect bait. At 1:47 p.m., Gunner's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Team Alpha successful," he reported quietly. "Warehouse secured. 5 children recovered all along. 2 suspects in custody. Evidence collected." Relief flooded through Rowan so intensely she felt dizzy. 5 children. Safe. Because she'd remembered a 20-minute visit to a warehouse 2 months ago. Because she'd paid attention when survival depended on noticing everything. "Are they okay?" she asked. "The kids?" "Wrench says they're dehydrated and scared, but no immediate medical emergencies. They're being transported to a hospital in Boise for evaluation." Rowan closed her eyes, letting the information settle. 5 lives saved. 5 children who would go home to families who'd never stop looking, the way she was going home. At 2:15 p.m., perimeter surveillance reported vehicle movement. 2 black SUVs approaching from the south, moving slowly, deliberately. Victor had come. "Remember the plan," Hawk said quietly to Rowan. "You stay visible until they enter the building. The moment they're inside, you move to the safe room. Steel door, reinforced walls. You lock yourself in, and you don't come out until we give the all clear." Rowan nodded, her heart suddenly pounding. This was it. The final confrontation with the monster who'd stolen 18 months of her life. The SUV stopped 50 yards from the mill entrance. Doors opened. Victor emerged, flanked by 4 men who moved with the casual confidence of professional violence. But it was Victor who commanded attention. He'd abandoned any pretense of respectability. No expensive suit, no silver-haired charm, just a man in dark clothes carrying rage like a weapon. His eyes found Rowan through the mill's broken windows. Even from 50 yards away, she could feel the weight of his gaze. The possessive fury, the absolute certainty that she belonged to him. "Rowan," Victor called, his voice carrying across the open ground. "Come out here, we're going home." Rowan stood slowly, making herself visible in the main doorway. Hawk and Gunner had retreated to positions just out of sight, ready to respond, but letting her have this moment. "I am home," Rowan called back, her young voice surprisingly steady. "This is where I belong, with people who actually care about me." Victor laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think these bikers care about you? You think that FBI agent gives a damn? You're a case file to them. A statistic. But to me, you're family. You killed my family. I created you." Victor's mask shattered completely. 18 months of training, teaching you to survive, to be strong, and to be useful. Everything you are, I made you. He started walking toward the mill, his bodyguards spreading out in a tactical formation. FBI snipers tracked their movement. Tactical teams prepared to move, but Sullivan had been clear. Let them get inside. Let them commit to the action. Then close the trap. You didn't create me, Rowan said, backing into the mill's interior as planned. You tried to break me, but you failed. And now I'm going to watch you lose everything. Victor was close enough now that she could see his expression, the cold fury, the predatory focus, and something else, something that looked almost like desperation. I can't lose you, Victor said, and for the first time Rowan heard something raw in his voice, something beyond rage. You're all I have left. After Sarah died, after I lost my little girl, you were the only thing that mattered. You look like her, sound like her. I can't let you go. The words hit Rowan like a physical blow. Sarah, Victor's daughter. Suddenly the entire nightmare made horrible sense. Victor wasn't just a trafficker. He was a bereaved father who'd twisted his grief into something monstrous, who'd been trying to replace the daughter he'd lost by stealing other people's children, who'd killed Rowan's parents because she resembled the little girl he'd buried. I'm not Sarah, Rowan said quietly, and stealing me won't bring her back. You could be, Victor insisted, climbing the steps to the mill entrance. If you just stopped fighting, if you just accepted that you belong with me, we could be a family again. We were never a family. You're just a sick man who killed my real family and tried to make me forget them. Victor's expression hardened. The momentary vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Then I guess we do this the hard way. He gestured to his men who moved forward with weapons drawn. That was the signal. FBI agents erupted from concealment. Snipers painted laser sights on the bodyguards. Tactical teams blocked the access road. In 3 seconds, the grain mill transformed from an abandoned building into a kill box. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Victor's bodyguards froze professional enough to recognize when they were outmatched. Weapons clattered to the ground. Hands went up. But Victor himself lunged forward, charging into the mill with desperate speed. Hawk stepped into his path, 6 feet 2 inches of former detective and current protection. The collision was brief and brutal. Victor was fast, but Hawk had 30 years of training. He redirected Victor's momentum, swept his legs, and had him face down on the concrete floor in less than 5 seconds. Handcuffs clicked into place. It's over, Hawk said quietly. You're done. But Victor twisted his head to look at Rowan, who stood in the doorway of the safe room. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll find a way. I always find a way. You'll never be free of me. Never. You'll wake up every night for the rest of your life knowing I'm out there, waiting, watching. Rowan walked forward slowly until she stood directly above him. No, she said clearly, I won't, because I'm not afraid of you anymore. You're just a broken man who hurt children because you couldn't deal with your own pain. You're weak. You're pathetic. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monster you are. Agent Sullivan appeared in the doorway, flanked by federal agents. William Elias Strauss, she announced formally. You're under arrest for interstate kidnapping, 8 counts of murder in the first degree, child trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. As they read him his rights, Victor continued to stare at Rowan with obsessive intensity. You're mine, he whispered. You'll always be mine. I was never yours, Rowan replied. I was borrowed for 18 months, but now I'm taking myself back. They dragged Victor to his feet and led him toward the waiting vehicles. He fought every step, twisting to keep Rowan in sight, shouting threats and promises and desperate pleas, until the SUV doors slammed and cut off his voice. And then he was gone. Rowan stood in the grain mill, surrounded by FBI agents and angels, and felt something shift inside her chest. The fear that had lived there for 18 months, the constant vigilance, the expectation of violence, the knowledge that safety was temporary and trust was dangerous. All of it began slowly to dissolve. She was free, really, truly, finally free. The tears came without warning, 18 months of held-back emotion breaking free in great shuddering sobs. Hawk picked her up without asking, held her while she cried into his shoulder, murmuring reassurances that she barely heard. You're safe. You're free. It's over. You did it. You survived. You won. Evelyn appeared from somewhere, wrapping her arms around both of them, adding her voice to Hawk's. We've got you, baby. You're safe. We're here. We'll always be here. Rowan cried until she had no tears left. Cried for her parents, for the 18 months stolen from her childhood, for the 5 children who'd been rescued because she'd been brave enough to remember. And finally, quietly, she cried with relief, because it was truly, completely, finally over. 2 months later, on a Tuesday morning in late spring, Rowan Grace Ashford walked into a federal courtroom in Portland, Oregon. She wore a blue dress that Evelyn had helped her pick out. Her hair, now properly cut and cared for, was pulled back in a neat braid. She looked like any other 7-year-old girl nervous about speaking in front of adults. But when she took the witness stand, something in her bearing changed. This was a girl who'd stared down monsters and won. The courtroom was packed. Media presence was heavy, though cameras were barred from filming Rowan directly. Federal prosecutors had built a case so comprehensive that Victor's defense attorneys had tried 3 times to negotiate a plea deal. Each time, Rowan had refused to agree. She wanted her day in court, wanted to look Victor in the eye one final time and speak her truth. Victor sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit flanked by lawyers and federal marshals. His silver hair was unkempt. His face had aged 10 years and 2 months. Prison did not agree with predators. When Rowan entered, his eyes locked onto her with laser focus. The same obsessive intensity, the same possessive rage. But this time, Rowan didn't flinch. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Winters, approached the witness stand with gentle professionalism. "Good morning, Rowan. Thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult." "It's okay," Rowan replied, her voice clear and steady. "I want to tell the truth about what happened. Can you tell the court how you came to be in the custody of the defendant, William Elias Strauss?" Rowan took a breath and began. She told them about the night her parents died, about waking to gunshots, about seeing Victor standing over her father's body, about being carried from the only home she'd ever known into a nightmare that would last 18 months. She told them about the motels, the constant movement, the deliberate isolation, the careful manipulation designed to make her forget her real family and accept Victor as her only source of security. She told them about the hunger, the fear, the 4 escape attempts that had failed, the beatings that followed. She told them about the other children, the warehouse in Idaho, the network of traffickers who treated human lives like commodities. And she told them about the rally, about running toward the sound of Harley engines because her father had once said bikers protect kids, about finding Hawk in the Angels, about choosing to fight instead of accepting defeat. Her testimony lasted 90 minutes. She never wavered, never broke down, spoke with the precision of someone far older than 7. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Catherine Winters had tears in her eyes. Several jurors were crying openly. Even the judge looked shaken. Victor's lead attorney approached for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. "Miss Ashford," he began carefully, "you were only 5 years old when these events allegedly began. Isn't it possible that your memories are confused? That time and trauma have distorted what actually happened?" Rowan looked at him with steady eyes. "I remember everything," she said simply. "Every motel, every fake name, every time Victor told me my real family didn't want me. I remember because forgetting meant dying. So no, my memories aren't confused." The attorney tried a few more questions, but each answer Rowan gave was clear, consistent, and devastating. Finally, he returned to his seat, knowing he'd gained nothing. Catherine Winters stood for redirect. "Rowan, is there anything else you'd like to say?" Rowan turned to look directly at Victor. "I used to think you were powerful," she said. "I thought you could do anything, find me anywhere, control everything. But you're not powerful. You're just a sad man who hurt children because you were too weak to deal with your own pain." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Your daughter Sarah died, and that was terrible. But she wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you to hurt other kids in her name. You dishonored her memory every single day you kept me prisoner." Victor's face contorted with rage and grief. "You don't know anything about Sarah," he snarled. "You don't have the right to speak about her." "And you didn't have the right to kill my parents," Rowan shot back. "But you did it anyway. You took everything from me because you couldn't handle your own loss. That makes you a coward. And I'm not afraid of cowards anymore." The judge's gavel came down. "Mr. Strauss, you will remain silent." But the damage was done. The jury had seen Victor lose control. had seen the mask slip completely. Rowan stepped down from the witness stand with her head high. As she passed the defense table, Victor lunged toward her, restrained immediately by marshals. "You're mine," he screamed. "You'll always be mine." Rowan stopped, turned, looked at him with something that might have been pity. "I was never yours," she said quietly. "I was always Rowan Grace Ashford, daughter of Michael and Rose, and nothing you did could change that." She walked out of the courtroom with Evelyn on one side and Hawk on the other. Behind her, Victor continued to rage until the marshals removed him from the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Victor Elias Strauss was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, plus additional time for trafficking charges in multiple states. He would die in prison, and Rowan would live free. 6 months after Victor's arrest, the Iron Thunder Rally returned to Riverside. The attendance had tripled. Word had spread throughout the motorcycle community about the chapter that had saved a child and exposed a trafficking network. Angels from across the country made the pilgrimage to Riverside, turning the annual rally into something larger than itself. A statement about what truly mattered. Rowan Grace Ashford arrived on Friday afternoon in a car driven by Evelyn and Thomas. She'd grown 3 inches in 6 months, gained 15 pounds. Her face had lost the gaunt, haunted look and filled out with the healthy roundness of childhood. She wore jeans and a t-shirt, looking like any other 8-year-old girl excited for a weekend adventure, except for the leather vest she carried carefully over one arm. Angels didn't give their colors to outsiders. The patches and insignia on a club vest meant membership brotherhood earned respect. But they'd made an exception for Rowan. The vest was child-size, crafted specially by a leather worker in Portland. On the back, instead of the club's traditional patches, it bore a simple eagle in flight above words that read, "Honorary Member, Riverside Chapter." And beneath that, Rowan Grace Ashford Gallagher. She'd legally added Hawk's surname to her own, not replacing Ashford, but adding to it, acknowledging both the family she'd been born into and the family that had saved her. Hawk was waiting at the clubhouse when they arrived. 6 months had been good to him, too. The hard lines around his eyes had softened. He smiled more easily, carried himself with the peace of someone who'd found purpose beyond survival. "Gracie Bird," he said, sweeping her into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "Uncle Hawk," she squealed, using the title that had evolved naturally over months of phone calls and visits. He set her down and looked at the vest she carried. "You ready to make it official?" "So ready." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. At sunset, with 200 angels gathered in a circle, Hawk helped Rowan put on her vest for the first time. Steele spoke about courage. Wrench talked about resilience. Gunner mentioned the importance of family blood, or chosen. And Hawk told the assembled chapters about a 7-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to run toward help instead of just away from danger. "Rowan Grace Ashford Gallagher," he announced formally, "is and always will be family to this chapter. She's under our protection, our care. Anyone who threatens her threatens all of us." The response was immediate and unified. 200 voices, so say we all. Rowan felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. She belonged here. Not instead of Sacramento, but in addition to it. Family wasn't either or, it was both and. That night, around a bonfire that reached toward the stars, Rowan sat with the 5 children who'd been rescued from the Idaho warehouse. They'd become close over the months, united by shared trauma and the knowledge that they'd survived something most people couldn't imagine. The youngest was Sophie, 6 years old, who'd been held for 8 months. Then came Marcus and James, both 8 brothers, who'd been taken together. Emma was 9, tough as nails, who'd protected the younger kids during captivity. And finally, there was Olivia, 10, who'd been missing for 2 years before Rowan's map led FBI to the warehouse. They called themselves the Phoenix 6, risen from ashes. "I got accepted to speak at a conference," Olivia announced, poking at the fire with a stick. "National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They want survivors to talk about what helped us cope, what gave us hope." "That's amazing," Rowan said. "Are you going to do it?" "I think so, if my therapist thinks I'm ready." Olivia glanced at Rowan. "You should apply too. They specifically asked about you. Said your testimony at the trial was powerful." Rowan considered. She'd been working with a therapist twice a week processing trauma, and rebuilding her sense of safety. It was hard work, painful work, but it was also freeing. Maybe, she said, let me talk to Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Hawk. Emma laughed. You have the most complicated family situation ever. Two sets of guardians, plus a motorcycle club, plus whatever relationship you've built with Agent Sullivan. Family's not about blood, Marcus said wisely. It's about who shows up when you need them. The simple truth of it resonated with all of them. They'd learned through pain and survival that family was a choice as much as a birthright. As the fire burned down and stars wheeled overhead, Rowan felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Complete, uncomplicated happiness. She was safe. She was loved. She was free, and she was going to use that freedom to help others find their way home. 5 years later, on a bright autumn afternoon, 13-year-old Rowan Grace Ashford Gallagher stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. The hearing room was packed. Members of Congress, advocates for missing children, survivors of trafficking, media from major networks, and in the front row, Evelyn and Thomas Ashford sat beside Jackson Hawk Gallagher, 3 people who'd helped Rowan rebuild her life from ashes. Rowan wore a professional blazer over jeans, her leather vest from the Angels draped over the back of her chair, a reminder of where she'd come from, who she'd become. She was testifying in support of the Child Trafficking Prevention Act legislation that would revolutionize how law enforcement tracked and dismantled trafficking networks. The bill had been years in development, but Rowan's voice, along with those of other survivors, was pushing it toward passage. My name is Rowan Grace Ashford Gallagher, she began, her voice clear and strong. When I was 5 years old, a man murdered my parents and kidnapped me. For 18 months, I was held captive, moved across 12 states, told repeatedly that no one was looking for me, that I'd been forgotten. She paused, making eye contact with several congresspeople. But I wasn't forgotten. My Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Thomas never stopped searching. The FBI never closed my case. And when I finally escaped, I found people willing to stand between me and a monster. She told them about the hellsangels chapter in Riverside, about Hawk and his brothers who'd protected a stranger's child without hesitation, about the importance of community networks in identifying and rescuing trafficking victims. The man who took me is serving 8 life sentences, Rowan continued. His trafficking network was dismantled. 5 other children were rescued because I remembered details that led investigators to a warehouse in Idaho. She pulled out a folder containing photographs. These are the Phoenix 6. That's what we call ourselves. 6 kids who survived Victor Strauss's trafficking operation. We're all thriving now. Sophie is 12 and wants to be a doctor. Marcus and James are 13 and starting their own podcast about missing children. Emma is 14 and already working with law enforcement as a consultant. And Olivia is 15 and just won a national essay contest about resilience. The photographs circulated through the committee. We survived because people didn't give up on us, because resources existed to help us heal, because the system, when it worked properly, prioritized our safety over bureaucracy. She leaned forward, her intensity commanding the room. But thousands of other kids aren't as lucky. They're still out there, still trapped, still waiting for someone to find them. The Child Trafficking Prevention Act would give law enforcement better tools, create national databases, fund recovery programs, save lives. She paused, choosing her final words carefully. 5 years ago, I was a 7-year-old girl who'd lost everything. Today, I'm 13 and I've built a new life. I've created the Ashford Foundation with my family, and we've helped 89 children escape trafficking situations. We've funded counseling, legal aid, and family reunification. She pulled out one more photograph, a recent picture from the Iron Thunder rally showing her surrounded by angels Evelyn and Thomas and the other members of the Phoenix 6. This is my family now, all of them, the aunt and uncle who never stopped looking, the biker who stood between me and danger, the FBI agent who coordinated my rescue, the 5 kids who survived alongside me. Family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them. She looked directly at the committee chair. I'm asking you to show up for the thousands of kids still waiting for rescue. Pass this bill, give them the same chance I got, the chance to come home. The silence that followed her testimony was profound. Then slowly applause began, starting with Evelyn, spreading through the audience until the entire hearing room was standing. Rowan stepped away from the podium with her head high. She'd survived. She'd healed. And now she was fighting to make sure others got the same opportunity. After the hearing, Hawk found her on the Capitol steps looking out over the city. "Your parents would be so proud," he said quietly. "Your real parents, Michael and Rose. They'd be amazed by the person you've become." Rowan leaned against his side the way she'd done 100 times over the past 5 years. "I think about them every day," she said. "I remember more now. Therapy helped unlock memories I thought were gone. Mama's laugh, Daddy's terrible jokes, the way they made me feel safe. You honor their memory by being exactly who you are, by taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and using it to help others. Is that what I'm doing?" "That's exactly what you're doing, Gracie Bird." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Washington. "Uncle Hawk," Rowan said finally, "thank you for everything, for believing a scared little girl, for standing up to Victor, for being family when I needed it most." "You don't have to thank me for that. You're family. That's what family does." Below them, Evelyn and Thomas were talking with congressional staffers, coordinating follow-up meetings and planning strategy for the bill's passage. The Phoenix Six had gathered near the fountain, taking selfies and laughing. Just teenagers being teenagers, except for the shared understanding in their eyes. Agent Sullivan approached from the Capitol building, her official demeanor softening when she saw Rowan. "Hell of a testimony, kid. I think you just moved the needle significantly. You think the bill will pass? After that performance, I'd be shocked if it didn't. You've got a gift for this, for making people understand what's at stake." Rowan smiled. "I learned from the best. You taught me that truth matters, that speaking up makes a difference." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Rowan Grace Ashford Gallagher looked at the people gathered around her, her family, all of them, blood and chosen, biological and found, traditional and unconventional, all equally important, all equally loved. She was 13 years old. She'd survived kidnapping, trafficking, and 18 months of psychological torture. She'd testified against her abuser and watched him sentenced to die in prison. She'd rebuilt her life from nothing, and now she was using that experience to change the world. Not bad for a girl who'd once been told she was worthless. Not bad at all. 1 year later, the Child Trafficking Prevention Act passed both houses of Congress and was signed into law. In the first 12 months of implementation, it led to the rescue of 417 children and the dismantling of 38 trafficking networks. The Ashford Foundation expanded operations to 6 states with a team of survivors working directly with law enforcement to identify and assist missing children. The Phoenix Six became advocates and educators, speaking at schools and conferences about resilience and recovery. And Rowan Grace Ashford Gallagher, now 14, divided her time between school in Sacramento, weekend visits to Riverside, and increasingly frequent trips to Washington to consult with lawmakers and law enforcement. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected sounds, still carried scars that would never fully heal. But she also had hope, purpose, family, and the unshakable knowledge that she'd survived the worst and become stronger for it. On a warm summer evening back in Riverside for the annual Iron Thunder rally, Rowan stood on the clubhouse porch with Hawk. The rally had grown into one of the largest in the Pacific Northwest. Over 1,000 riders now made the pilgrimage, drawn by the chapter's reputation and the story of the girl they'd saved. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Taking me in that night, everything that came after." Hawk looked at her with surprise. "Regret saving your life, regret gaining a daughter in all but blood, not for a single second. Even with all the complications, the legal battles, the media attention, especially because of those things. They meant what we did mattered. That saving you changed things beyond just one life." Rowan nodded, watching the sun set over rows of motorcycles gleaming in the fading light. "I used to think my life ended that night Victor killed my parents," she said quietly, "that everything after was just survival. But I was wrong. That night was just a terrible chapter. Not the whole story." She looked up at Hawk with clear eyes. "My story is about more than what happened to me. It's about what I did with it, how I survived, how I fought back, how I found family in unexpected places and used that love to help others." "That's exactly right," Hawk agreed. "You're not defined by your trauma. You're defined by your courage." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rowan felt the same sense of peace she'd experienced that first night 6 years ago. She was home, safe, surrounded by people who loved her, and she was free. Really, truly, finally free. He found me again, she whispered to herself, remembering that desperate plea to strangers at a motorcycle rally. But this time the words held no fear. Because yes, Victor had found her, again and again. But the last time he found her, she'd found her freedom, and her voice, and her purpose. Some angels had wings, others had motorcycles. And one 7-year-old girl had learned that sometimes the right kind of angels were exactly what you needed to find your way home.